Hey Greyhounds fans, thank you for listening to the Hounds Huddle podcast on Moraviansports.com, the Greyhound Sports Network, and wherever you listen to your podcasts. I am LJ Smith, Assistant Director of Athletic Communications at Moravian University, and on this episode, I sat down with the Director of Cross Country and Track and Field, Jesse Baumann, going back to his days as a student athlete in Wisconsin, concluding with his 11th season as the head coach of the Moravian Greyhounds cross country programs. So let's get this episode started and meet our guest, Jesse Baumann. And welcome back to the Hounds Huddle podcast on the Greyhound Sports Network, Moraviansports.com, and wherever you listen to your podcast. I'm joined by guest head coach Jesse Baumann of the cross country and track and field programs. Jesse, thank you for spending time with me today, and we'll get to go through your history as a student athlete, your coaching tenure, and finishing your 11th season with the cross country program. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And we'll get right into it. So cross country is one of those things where like it's running, but it's competitive running. Did you know that's what you kind of wanted to do as a kid? Was that like a sport, or did you dabble in other sports growing up?
When I'm recruiting, I kind of joke about this all the time that probably 90%, I don't joke, but we talk about probably 90% of the athletes we talk to came from some other sport. Soccer always seems to be the prevailing one, and I was like that too. Like every other little, whippersnapper, I was running around on the soccer fields and all that kind of stuff. And we did indoor. I grew up in Wisconsin, so we had indoor, which is really cool. You're in like maybe a hockey-sized arena with the old school AstroTurf on it and fuzzy ball, like these little kind of yellow fuzzy balls. You can just kick the heck out of the ball, and a lot of fond memories of that. And I don't know that I ever had visions of being. Well, I guess when you're that age, you're going to be a pro athlete in something. But soccer was kind of the original trajectory. But then I was good at kicking the heck out of the ball, but any other skills, not so much. So I had a friend, his name was Dan Schneider. He was on the soccer team, and his family had always gone up through running at the high school I went to, Verona Area High School. And we were both realizing we're never going to cut it in high school. So around 8th grade, since his brothers had long gone before him and gone to states and all this stuff, he convinced me to come out for middle school cross country in 8th grade, and then that's how that happened. So I was like many others. I don't think anyone grows up in 5th grade is like, I'm going to be a state champion in cross country. You just kind of stumble into this sport, and as another example of that.
So you joined the cross country team in 8th grade, and you progressed throughout high school. Were you recruited in high school? What was that process like for you as you continued to kind of grow your love for the sport?
I had some success. I wasn't like an all-state superstar or anything like that, but I actually was not recruited much. UW River Falls talked to me a little bit. I think it was, who else was it? They're Wisconsin school, so probably people won't even know them, but I wasn't recruited much. And then, I don't know if it's a function of the times, since we have something called mile split. It's a way that you track what everybody else is running throughout the country. That wasn't really in existence. You didn't have cell phones yet. Email was just starting. I sound like I'm dating myself so much here, and I don't know if that's a function of it, but I really hardly got recruited. I think I had one recruiting call from my college coach after I'd already committed to the school 3 months prior to that.
Okay.
So I was hardly ever talked to. And truth be told, I was okay, but it wasn't like a standout. I broke out a lot my senior year of track when things were kind of too late. So I kind of just went to the school I wanted to for the major, and then running kind of I fell into running at that school.
So for me and others might think if you do cross country, you just do track and field. Now, what was like distance running and then doing other events in track and field? They don't always correlate, but there are distance events in track and field. So when you got to track and field, was it like I'm a distance event runner?
Well, again, another kind of evolution process where in 8th grade, I guess maybe everyone starts out that. You think if you're going to do track, you think you're a sprinter and a jumper. So I started out with the jumps, and I stunk, of course. Just wasn't my skill set. But then it just kind of an evolution process. Coach Marks was my coach at Verona, and heck of a guy. Still coaching cross country there. Just awesome icon at Verona. But he just kind of saw where my talents were going with cross country, and then in track, you just eventually. It depends on how each program does it, but you just see where people naturally align. Cross country runners tend to gravitate towards the distance running. The only other thing that you sometimes maybe see some fluctuation in is the 4x4 is kind of like an in-between point in a track and pro, where your sprinters move up, some of your faster distance runners move down. I stumbled into that. Coach Marks threw me into a sophomore JV 4x4, and all of a sudden I popped a good time, and that wound up being an event that was a big part of what I was doing the rest of high school. But always a distance runner, you tend to just gravitate towards the distance events. The 4x4 is like that one kind of exception, in-betweener event, yeah.
So you end up going to the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, and you're a student athlete there in both cross country and track. What was your experience like as a student athlete?
Yeah, it almost didn't happen. It's kind of what I was talking about before, where I went to orientation, and in June or something like that, and I really hadn't talked to Coach Witt a whole lot. He's still coaching there right now. But he had tapped me on the shoulder at one of like the registration sessions or whatever it was and said, "Hey, you're coming out for the team." And I was like, I guess. Like, we kind of talked about it, but I didn't put a lot of thought in it. I'm really not that's a true story, honestly. I wasn't sure if I was going to run in college, and that was, like mid-June. I kind of almost felt guilted into doing it, so I kind of ended up falling into it. And then I honestly went to Stevens Point I was majoring in something called watershed management. It's a branch of environmental sciences, and that was my focus. And then running, like I said, until Coach Witt kind of tapped me on the shoulder, I really hadn't thought a lot about it. So my freshman year, I don't know. I wasn't sure if I was going to do this running thing, and I kind of went through it. I did a really poor job of training in the summer, and I came in and got my butt whooped, quite frankly. So it wasn't a very positive experience, but then I had a little more proficiency in track. So freshman year, track started to click, and then I started to kind of rediscover the passion for it, and then it really became a big part of my student-athlete experience. There's one real kind of like galvanizing moment or something like that is my sophomore year, where we were trying to determine who were going to get people to go to nationals in the DMR. We had a guy, Jesse Drake, who's a really good anchor. He is one of the best runners in the country. And we're trying to figure out the other pieces put into it. So my coach had this kind of clever strategy where we had one baton waiting. He had three people would lead off in the first leg of the DMR. There's only one baton that was going to be handed out, or one person waiting for the next leg. So basically those three teammates were in a competition. Whoever was first of the team, he determined would be the fastest leg to then hand off to the rest of the relays that ultimately Jesse Drake would be anchoring. I happened to beat my other three teammates, and then that led me to going to nationals as a sophomore. And then that experience at nationals, my sophomore year, is what really kind of got me back into the sport. And I don't want to make it sound like, I was, I didn't care about it to that point, but that like really, really cemented and galvanized kind of my commitment to it again, that I kind of lost a little bit between some point in high school going into college.
So you mentioned going to nationals. You were a 6-time NCAA Division III national meet qualifier and a 4-time All-American in the 800-meter, the 1,500-meter, and the distance medley relay, which is incredible just hearing that. You just reflected back a little bit on your sophomore year, but what were those experiences like for you being able to compete at the national level?
Yeah, I was kind of a running stat nerd, so I knew what everyone was doing. There's a website at the time called raceberryjam.com, which is still sort of in existence. That's how you tracked what everybody else across the country was. So then to kind of expand off this, after college, I wound up starting my own kind of like running website. It's called freewebs.com, and I like interview runners from across the country. The point I'm getting at is I really got into like who else is in the country, almost to the point where I psych myself out sometimes. Like you put people on a pedestal because they're so good. But either way, like I said, that moment sophomore year at nationals, what really kind of got me going and really got me interested in it again. So at least for the national experiences, like they're all really neat. They're fun. Obviously getting to compete against there's an Olympian, one of the best-known D3 athletes, Nick Simmons. He is I don't know how many time Olympian in the 800. But as I was a senior, he was coming up as a freshman. And people knew he was like this big stud and all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of cool to run against some of those people. But overall, like the national experience that's ultimately what got me into coaching. Like my senior year of cross country, we had two really good front runners, Mark Lalonde and Kurt Johnson. And they are guys that ended up becoming All-Americans. They were like super studs. They both got hurt at the beginning of the season. And so we had all these high hopes and all that kind of stuff and all the natural, oh crap, our season's not going to be good. All that kind of emotions come through. And that whole season was like, we kind of prided ourselves on being the best, worst team in the country. Meaning like we didn't have any star. We were just like a bunch of seniors and obviously some underclassmen that just were kind of no names that just worked their butts off. Mm-hmm. And we didn't think we were going to be able to get to nationals as a senior. And as a senior, obviously you want to end on a high note and all that jazz. but then we just had this breakout meet at regionals down in Illinois. And I remember when we had like our top 5 had all finished within about 12 seconds of each other, and we knew when the finish line we'd made nationals even before the results came out. It's just like we had such a great race, and just that moment is probably why I got into coaching. Like, I went to Stevens Point for my degree and all kind of stuff, and graduated and worked in that field for a little bit, but like how gratifying that was with all the junk we had gone through and all the hopes that were diminished in the beginning of the season, how we worked to get to that ultimate goal of making nationals as a team. Like, that was a moment that I still remember the feeling. I still remember all the sights, and I don't mean to sound so cheesy, but 20 some years later, it still sticks out to me. So kind of long-winded to answer your question. The national experience definitely had an impact on me.
But that's something, like, as cheesy or however it may sound, those are the types of things that stay with you through your career, whether it's a coach, a student athlete, a spectator. Like, remembering those little moments just keep you pushing forward in your career.
Yeah. And that's that's kind of what switched me from, eventually, I guess kind of talking about, I went and pursued, I work for the state of Wisconsin Environmental Agency. It's called Department of Natural Resources. And I liked what I did and all that kind of stuff, but I kind of kept coming back to some of those moments, that moment at regionals that got us to nationals, and all that, and how much that meant to me. And again, the whole process, it's not just that moment. It's that, all the blood, sweat, and tears and all those cheesy sayings. There's truth to that. Like when you're getting out there in the middle of July after you work, 8-10 hours at your summer job, and it's, you're sweating your buns off from work, and then you put in all that work, and then it comes to that one moment where you reach that goal. Like, what I was doing with my career in environmental sciences, there's nothing wrong with it, but it didn't have that high and low, that emotion, that, energy, and but certainly that moment that got us to nationals as a team my senior year is what it took a little bit for me to switch careers, but that ultimately was what kind of resonated and got me to stick with the coaching thing.
So following your career as a student athlete, you mentioned you worked outside of athletics. So that was the next step for you, was following your career path. Yeah. Then you became the distance coach at your alma mater. So when did that take place? So
I spent a 5th year. I was finishing up, I was doing a soil science minor. It was really exciting. So it's been me some extra time to get involved with that. With the career I was going into, it was actually really useful. So I just kind of was studying, and then I asked Coach Witt, do you want someone that can kind of help out a little bit? So he helped me help out with the coaching. It was more just kind of just being there, kind of learning the ropes. He let me do some stuff with some plyometric type work with the middle distance runners. He gave me some autonomy, but by and large, it's just there to kind of help and support. So, but yeah, that was like the first taste. So I did that kind of my 5th year, and then I wound up actually, getting a real job, so to speak, for about 2 years, something like that, before I eventually stumbled back into coaching. But.
So stumbling back into coaching, you went on to be the women's cross country and track and field coach at Lynchburg College. Who helped influence you and kind of get you to want to be a head coach?
Yeah, again, I keep going back to that experience. And then also, Rick Witt, he helped me as I was doing that 5th year, kind of helping with coaching. And it was sort of a little bit of a crossroads in a way in my life. He excited me about coaching, but ultimately, I worked for the state of Wisconsin for a year, and I decided to go back to grad school to get a degree to go a little further with environmental sciences. But again, I missed kind of that high and low. So a guy that I ran with my first year at Stevens Point, he was I think a 5th year senior, Matt Hayes. He was at Lynchburg College at the time, and we had talked a couple of times about, because he's the same thing, he's an environmental science major, kind of made the transition, and he is leaving Lynchburg for another job. So he kind of is in the middle of the school year. Actually, this time of year is in December, which is a pretty crummy time for any. It's a terrible time for a spring sport to be leaving. So he'd called me up and kind of talked to Jack Thomas, his boss at Lynchburg, the track coach there too. I said, you might want to interview this Jesse Baumann guy. And one thing led to another, and I wound up leaving my grad school program at the time, which I didn't feel great about, but sometimes you have to take risks. And then I moved to Virginia, where I didn't know anyone, didn't have any ties, anything like that. Wasn't making a ton of money by any means, but took a leap of faith and tried it, and whatever, I was 24 at the time or something like that. So I guess you're young enough, you're like, I'll figure it out if this doesn't work out. And yeah. So that's how I end up kind of getting my feet firmly into the coaching thing when I was at Lynchburg that way.
on top of coaching at Lynchburg and your experience at Stevens Point, you also earned a couple of certifications with the USATF and USTF CCCA, which covers a multitude of events, categories. Why do you feel like that was important to you to have knowledge in every aspect of track and field and cross country?
For a head coach, it's obvious that, like, we have it all the time where one of our assistant coaches can't make it, so you got to cover a practice. So there's that kind of like the literal benefit to that. Maybe that's something that's worth noting in track and field is, I don't mean to diminish other sports, but I don't know there are many sports that are more diverse in the type of participants, the athletes, whatever you want to say, as there are in track. You know, in basketball, everyone shoots and plays defense. And again, I don't mean to minimize that by any means, but what a center versus a guard has to do is not quite the contrast you have between a pole vaulter and a long distance runner. You know, so again, that's not minimizing either sport, but the reality of track is the diversity of athletes and skills and all that you need to teach are so much different, that's one of the reasons why I think it's really important to get the certifications. The other thing is, I think it really helped me grow. No doubt it helped me evolve as a coach in a big way. I not set my ways, but I did a lot of reading, took a lot from what I did in college, all that kind of stuff, you know. But Steve Ron, he's now the coach at Catholic, but he was an assistant here for a long time, and he was involved that. He really encouraged me to get involved in some of this education through our governing body, and that really changed how I look at speed development, even with distance runners, but we apply it to our sprinters, and it's really become a theme that is something I mandate with all of our coaches if we're going to bring them on. Like, I want them to follow this model because I really believe in it, but it's really helped me grow as a coach, and I do things now that with the training in the weight room, different stuff like that, that I never did before I took these classes. Never even thought about it. I'd scoff at a distance coach making their runners do true speed work, like actually 30-meter hill sprints, doing Olympic lift, stuff like that. I credit Steve Ron a lot for encouraging me to get into some of this other education, where it's really evolved how I've thought about coaching, and it's made big benefits. The first class that I worked with of middle distance runners, after I took some of these classes, like, you can tangibly see how they skyrocketed from some of the different training methods. So it's good to, always be learning, not be set in your ways. I don't know, I'm kind of going on a little bit of a tangent here, but it's been beneficial to kind of hear from some other experts in the field, so you don't just have this tunnel vision. There's a point in time where we thought static stretching before you ran was a good thing, and now we've kind of learned through exercise science it's one of the worst things you can be doing for yourself is when you're over lengthening a cold muscle. And other things like that, like we just learn through trial and error as a coaching community in any sport, not just track. I think it's really, really important to always keep yourself educated. So at least every other year, I try to make sure I'm doing one of the coaching education components to make sure I'm sharp.
Well, and that also helps benefit with a sport like track and field, having multiple individuals on your staff, because they can help focus on one or two different areas of the sport, because you knowing distance work and then trying to criticize a throw now having a tenure like you do, but like if it's your first, second year and you're definitely a distance coach trying to tell someone how to not throw or what to do throwing can be very off-putting, but being able to have the correct people on your staff that you feel fit, but also having yourself get the knowledge you need.
Yeah, again, that's one of the things I kind of picked up in my previous stops coaching too, is there's sort of tangent to this, but I think it's really important as a head coach to give autonomy to your assistant coach, to make them, not micromanage every single thing that they do, but rather it's kind of what you just said, is hire people that you know what to look for in advance in some of their coaching philosophies, so that then you have faith to give them autonomy. And you're like you said, it's very rare that I'm going up to Dan McSturdy or John Taver or whatever and telling them what to do or what not to do. They email me all their training plans before the week is, and I'll glance over and make sure nothing looks out of the sorts. But by and large, it's having the base knowledge so that you know that they're doing the right thing, and you can kind of oversee and let them kind of run with it. But like I said, there's still days where some of our sprint coaches, we're in the arc a little bit later, and I need to run a hurdle practice, so it's beneficial for me to have that background where push comes to shove, I'm making sure that I'm looking for different the keys in the blocks or in the high jump or whatever the case might be. But by and large, it's what you said, is making sure you set up your event coaches so that you can trust them to have the autonomy to have their own programs, if you will.
So you're at Lynchburg and you hear about the opportunity to coach at Moravian College, now university, but at that point Moravian College. What really drove you to take on a program like Moravian?
Yeah, I kind of had a few ties where Kate Curran was her name at the time, but she's a coach at Susquehanna who knew Walt Wendell. And then one of Kate's best friends, this is probably, I'm not saying in a very coherent way, but Kate was good friends with someone I coached with at Lynchburg through Penn State. They knew each other at Penn State.
Okay.
Kate coached in the same conference as Walt Wendell. Kate's best friend coached with me down at Lynchburg. If that makes sense or not, I don't know. But that's how I kind of came to know a little bit about the Moravian job, and Kate Curran had kind of tipped me off to it. But the other thing is we came up here all the time for the Paul Short meet, which is right across the river over at Lehigh. So I had some familiarity in the area, and we go up to like the Armory it's the the indoor track right across the GW Bridge, stuff like that. So I come through the area. That being said, it's not like I had a whole bunch of family or other main ties. It's just sort of, again, a weird coaching connection that kind of drew me to. Kate Curran had mentioned when Walt was stepping down. And that's kind of how I ended up here. But yeah, I applied, and it was late. I remember going through the interview, getting lost in the middle of Music Fest. I literally was trying to find Moravian. I came up the day before to interview with Scott Dapp and Mary Beth Spurk and Bob Ward and a bunch of others. And I was just trying to scout the area, check out where trails are, and get a better feel for the area. And I wound up getting lost downtown. But that was actually something that really appealed to me. It's kind of a happy coincidence or something like that, happy mistake, to get lost downtown Bethlehem during Music Fest, because like part of when you're applying to a job is you got to see yourself there, not just as a coach. And of course, there's got to have the things that you want to be successful for a program, but is it a community I could see myself living in? And then to be writing, about as festive or whatever as an eventful at times you can have in Bethlehem. It's kind of funny, good timing. But yeah, I'll be honest, I had some hesitations in part because it's so late. Like I actually moved up here after cross country had already started. So it was like the first week of the season. So, and when I was at Lynchburg, I put a lot of effort. Doug Thomas, was the coach there at the time. We put a lot of effort into creating a cross-country course, because we hosted that year on some land that Lynchburg owned. It's a gorgeous course. We were out there with bobcats and literally like blazing the trails and all that kind of stuff. I was doing that like 3 weeks before, so part of me felt loyal to staying to Lynchburg and all the work I put in. But the other thing is I just knew that this had more long-term stability, more viability. And I knew, looking at Moravian's history, I was running when Mark Will Weber was having some of his heyday with Heidi Wolfsberger and Emily Schertzer and all the others. I was aware of Moravian, the success that they had, even when I was there as an athlete. So that's what kind of appealed to me, even as I was kind of having some reservations about moving so late after I'd committed so much to Lynchburg. I was like, this place has had some history. And again, like I said, it's a place I thought I could be happy with, as Bethlehem seemed like a pretty cool town. And
now
they hired me against their better judgment, and then they haven't fired me yet against their better judgment. But
are you looking to get your hands on Moravian University Greyhounds gear? Head over to moraviansports.com and click the link Sideline Store under the tab Fan Zone to find our Moravian apparel store. Each month, there is a promotion that offers a discount to all things Greyhounds, from hats, hoodies, shirts, and more. Head to the Moravian Athletics Sideline Store today, powered by BSN Sports. After 11 years here, you've been at the helm of both the cross-country programs and track and field programs. You have now 3 landmark conference championships in cross-country for the men, 2 in the women. You have coached the first male cross-country All-American in 2014, female All-American in 2016. Over your tenure, those are astounding feats for a cross-country program, and you're still continuing to grow and build with youth as well in your team. What do you attribute to the continuation of this program? Because, as you mentioned, there have been quality runners and athletes coming out of this program, but to still kind of cultivate that moving forward, there has to be, I don't want to say a trick, but there has to be something within your coaching style that's still pulling those type of athletes.
There's probably some coaching stuff, but to me, a lot of it is culture. And I said this a lot, and after our men had won this year, one of the first things I tried to do is give credit to Our class that came in 2016, if we're at least speaking for the men, but honestly, there's a lot of the same thing happened with women, like the culture Carly Janoski and others established. But Greg Jindal, Justin Beasley Turner, Alex Tercy, Gavin Kemery, I'm missing some, Devin Fogel, I'm not listing everyone in that class, but they came in and they just had Aaron Hoffman, he's the year before, but they all contribute to a really good culture of guys that want to have fun, but they're just good people, and they just were willing to, you never had to worry about them getting into trouble on the weekends or them not getting in their long run when you're not looking, all that kind of stuff. Like I don't know if we lucked out, wherever the case what may be, the reality is that 2016 class and that group established just an awesome culture that's just we've been able to build off of. And this, I think, from them, I've been more cognizant in the recruiting process of when we bring a recruit to campus, I try and vet the guys afterwards. And is this someone you can kind of see yourself clicking with? That's obviously something we ask the recruit, but I vet our own athletes too. Is this, a good egg? Is this person going to be a problem? And I think through that, we've kind of been able to attract, people that are good hard workers. I talked to Devin Harris about this one. He's like, how would you describe our program? And I think we're just blue collar guys, and women too. I'm sorry, I don't mean to just focus on the men, but just we aren't always the all-state accolades, whatever, sending huge NIL deals or whatever. We're kind of looking for the people that have a lot more room to grow and have a lot more hunger to grow too. And we've just been able to kind of build it. And you've had some hit and misses. Some people don't work out. Maybe it's injuries or other things. But by and large, we've just been able to, it seems like 2016, both men and women. I don't want to overlook the women, but we had a big culture change that's really we've been able to build off of since then.
And that starts with recruiting. Being able to find, like you mentioned, someone who's coachable, willing to work, but also still fit in and grow with a group of individuals. Yeah. So that contributes to what is still helping the program grow.
Yeah. The other thing you look for in recruiting, and this kind of goes into, it has a culture component too, is, I don't want to say the schools, but there are certain schools that I won't bother reaching out to because sometimes their programs just seems like you don't see as much room for growth after high school. They really take high school seriously, and they win a lot of the state titles and all that kind of stuff, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But you don't necessarily see the room for growth at the next level.
Tapping their full potential.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's another thing we kind of look for is look for them to be, hungry, so to speak, in a lot of ways, in the sense that maybe they feel like, I talk to recruits all the time, they feel like, maybe my mileage should be higher, I should be doing this in the weight room, all that kind of stuff. And to me, if you're low-end mileage and all that kind of, and a lot of things that your training you haven't tapped into yet, that's really exciting to me because we're looking for those people that can keep on growing. I saw that in Greg Jindal when we recruited him, and he ended up coming here, and Justin Beasley Turner and Carly Janoski and a lot of people, and that, as a knock on some of their coaches. Some of their coaches in high school do that by design, but they give them room to grow, get some good results while they're in high school, but not, burn out the passion in high school. And I guess, that's stuff that we're kind of cognizant of in the recruiting process too, is who has, room to grow, and of course the hunger to do it too.
Talking with one of your former student athletes, Alec Duncan, who's the cross country and track and field coach at Cedar Crest, he didn't feel like he was able to compete at this level. And then being able to unlock that potential is something that he never, he will always remember, because not that he didn't value himself, but he needed that coaxing to realize, wow, I can really do this.
Yeah.
But having a group of guys along next to him that helped push him, Hoffman, Farrell, just a couple of those names that kind of pushed him to do better. So having that kind of mindset as well, like Shane Houghton has spoke about that too, having individuals that he really wants to push himself for. Yeah. And not only just on your team, but being aware of the conference.
Yeah.
That's a whole other thing too. As you mentioned, you kind of geeked out on knowing who was doing what. But no, if you have athletes that are all right, this kid from X school has been running this, I know I can catch that. I know I can train to get that time. That all feeds into that hunger in the culture.
Yeah. But then the same thing with the team is Sarah Hughes and Meg Brockett. They were two of the best runners we've ever had here, certainly in a long time. Mm-hmm. Meg Brockett was an All-American for us, and Sarah Hughes they've been removed, but had some conference records for us, went to nationals, all that kind of good stuff. But they're an example of two people that really fed off of each other in workouts. They push each other so hard, and with the culture component, especially when they're men, both genders, men and women, how the training packs that we have and how you maybe people you didn't expect on paper to all of a sudden grow when you just have a good culture of good guys that push each other every single run. You're just going to go out and do a random Tuesday run, and you've got like 7, 8 other guys are going to go the same route as you and push you on that, let you just kind of slack off and run a crummy pace or shorten the distance. Like when you have that core of I keep saying the culture, when you have that, that's how you kind of get maybe some diamonds in the rough. We've had so many people that, again, on paper, you wouldn't expect to take off. Natalie Novotny is a great example of that. You look on paper, I say her all the time, she's like, I don't know, 160th or 200th, whatever it was in districts. When she ran for Sun Valley and when they ran high school, ran districts right across the river, like that gets overlooked.
Yep.
And truth be told, yeah, her high school times weren't anything spectacular. But she came from a team as like 3 teammates on her high school team or something like that. No one was anywhere near her. But then once she got in and was able to run with the Molly Talaricos and the Carly Donoskis and all that kind of stuff and push themselves every day, like she just exploded. And she's a 2-time conference cross-country champ for us, running times that, she dwarfed by, multiple factors when she got here. And, I could ramble for, hours and others examples of that. But it's I'm broken record. You get the culture, and you touch on yourself. If you have a nice core of people that are willing to work hard, you can get the Natalie Novotnys and the Devin Harrises, who on paper never should have really taken off. The Alec Duncans on paper never should have taken off like he did, but with Dylan Farrell and some others pushing him and Donnie Noble and stuff, just put him in that environment. You can really see things grow. So that's something I've also focused on recruiting now too, is building up our numbers a little bit, because I'm really happy with where, again, the work ethic is. And then sometimes you have those people that on paper maybe weren't, again, the ones you expect to really ascend. Shane Houghton's you mentioned it. He's a great example of that. I never expected Shane to go to nationals when I was recruiting him. I'll be honest, but he is part of a larger roster of good guys that are pushing him and gave him examples of how to run. Again, Greg and Justin Beasley Turner were such good examples of that, and he took that, ran with that, and he was at nationals 4 weeks ago or whatever it was.
Yeah, just to see the progress. And that's the one thing, not that you don't see that in any other sport, because obviously I talked to a couple other coaches already on episodes of this, and progress throughout 4 years. But I think it's a little different for track and field, because you're seeing it over the span of a year in different events.
Yeah.
Where it's like you have a fall season to get this done. Yeah, you can see different things throughout a cross-country season. Then you go to indoor, and then you're like, wow, they're doing all right. And then you're like, I could see them doing so well in outdoor now. So just seeing the progression over a full 4 years.
There's, not to cut you off, but 2 women that jump out. Natalie Novotny and Emma Marion were 2 really good examples of that, where they came in as freshmen. Their freshman cross-country seasons were, not to be rude, they're just kind of ho-hum. And all of a sudden indoors, like you could see in workouts and races, and you're like, this is a completely different runner. So it's exactly what you said, and it's a nice thing about our sport, is that you don't have those gaps, and you can kind of see it building. And again, Emma Marion and Natalie Novotny jump to mind of people in recent years where it's exactly what you said, cross-country, getting their legs under them, whatever you want to say, and specifically indoors. I can remember the specific 5K even with Emma Marion over at Lehigh. You saw like freshmen indoors, all of a sudden they were a new person, new athlete.
So we'll move forward now. It's 2019. Both men's and women's squads finished second place in the conference meet. And then a global pandemic hits. It's hard enough to try to deal with it on a personal level, but you're in charge of not just one program, but cross-country and track and field. What was that experience for you like, trying to run a program in such a difficult and confusing time?
It's such a long process. It's sort of like there's a lot of different answers to it. But I think the one thing that I felt like I was constantly trying to find a way to keep the team's hopes up, and that goes for the track and everyone. I remember specifically roughly this time last year, we were talking to the track team and trying to say, we think we're going to have a season. As coaches, we honestly believed in our heart of hearts, but they kept getting new signs like, oops, something else is getting canceled, and it looks like whenever that start point for our sport keeps getting delayed and delayed and delayed. So as a coach, just trying to give them the faith that you're training for something, and that was a tough sell, and I don't blame the alley. I get why it's frustrating. Kind of backtracking with that, in the cross-country season, a coach out in, I think it was Denison, he started kind of like a virtual meet series. So across the country, people would do like a Google sheet. They'd have a specific distance they could race that week. And then you had like during the weekend to submit results. So you just, an honor system of, it's like an 800-meter one weekend. Okay. Everyone in the country run an 800-meter, and you'd score it that way. So we or
So
everyone races.
innovative. To
Yeah,
try to keep
exactly.
people
So
involved, and that's the one thing you could do. Like you could be outside, you could
Yeah.
do like that's the one thing running you could do. Golfing, like other individual things. That's such a unique way to keep the sport going in a time like that.
And that's what we tried to do is, in essence, we were literally, I guess you'd call it, racing against ourselves. This was, about 15 months ago last fall, where we do a 5K on the track or 5K on the roads, whatever it was. But, I mean, they would physically see the results. And some of them, they would be names they knew from, like, Washington Lee or whatever the school was.
Yeah.
So you could kind of, virtually race other people, and they'd score the meet and stuff like that. So it was one way to keep it engaged. But we had to use tricks like that. But it's clearly frustrating because especially like I talked a lot about that 2016 class, and
we talked about it in the preview as well.
Yeah, like
that senior class.
Is that senior class? So, and it's not like we're unique to that. I mean, every sport and every school had that, but especially for us with our distance running program, that was such a special class for this program. To see them, in some cases lose their senior year, like Carly Donosky jumps to mind, where we were literally at the practice track in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, to run the national meet. Did our warm-up, went back to the hotel to take a nap before we go out to dinner, and then we get the text, nope, you're going home. Like, we're literally shoulder to shoulder with lacrosse and Wartburg and everyone else in the country doing our warm-ups, and you send home. And what stinks with Carly is, like, she was just freaking on fire that year, just on fire. She ran our school record in the mile, and she was running some of those meets. When she's running some of these fast times, she was gapping people in the last half mile by like 60 meters, which you put her in an environment with the best in D3, shoulder to shoulder with them. What could have happened, because she always had a great kick.
Yep.
Those are things that stink. Like, you wonder, could she have been a national champ? I'm not going to say that definitively, because how can you? But
Yeah.
you can't help it.
You can't help but speculate.
Yeah. But so those stories always really stink. I mean, luckily people like Greg Jindal were able to kind of rebound since he's doing our athletic training program here, and he turned that into a great thing with him getting All-American. But other people like Gavin Kemery and Devin Fogel and Alex Tursi and Keita Mayer, I mean, they just lost that because they had to move on to other things in their lives, of course. So that you feel so crummy for so many people like that just, it's, you had all these high expectations for something that's been building and building, and then it's such a crummy feeling when you're literally at the national meet and just chopped off. But we weren't the only ones. We were talking with E-Town when we were out there. Sam Gerstenbacher, he was another one that, he was part of a really good class in our conference. Our conference had a really good, especially on the men's side, Junior had a really good class. A lot of did. He was someone that probably could have been easily All-American. I think he was in the 3K that year. So everyone has that story.
Yeah.
So I'm not looking for, whatever, any sympathy or anything like that, because we all dealt with it, but still, it doesn't make it any less for the people that had to go through with it.
So you unfortunately lose the fall season of 2020, even the indoor season. It just doesn't happen. But you are able to compete outdoors in track and field in 2021. But there were still some obstacles with running in masks, which trying to add that obstacle of running in a mask, you're at least competing. So what was the energy like from your teams being able to finally just compete?
Obviously, we're just happy to be out there after whatever it was, 12 months. Of course, that was part of it. But then there was some frustration because we'd hear about a lot of other conferences and schools and high schools and stuff that didn't have to race in the masks. And there is, at the time, this is like whatever, in March or something like that, we could just kind of tell that it was tougher to breathe with a mask on. And then it's so early in the process, not like people are doing a lot of, clinical trial studies or whatever on the effects of mask, but there's some things coming out in Britain about how it reduces your VO2 max, which is basically the amount of oxygen you can utilize, by up to 30%, and we could, I didn't need a study from Britain to tell me that, but there's some objective data that were coming out that kind of demonstrated that. So like we kind of knew as a drawback. The flip side is, and I'm not faulting anyone for making that decision, like if we wanted to compete with the schools that we were in, we need to wear masks, so deal with it. And I think that's what we eventually, I don't mean that sounds so cold, but that's just the reality of the situation. Like, at least we're competing. There are schools that are right down the road from us. Haverford and a lot of the Centennial schools didn't even have a season. That's what we were telling our team. Is like, we're frustrated. It could be a little bit better in our, kind of biased opinion. It could be a heck of a lot worse.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Yeah, it's frustrating. It had some drawbacks and all kind of stuff, at least to when we got to the conference meet. But then after the conference meet, we were able to race without masks. So we actually took some of our better athletes at the time on the national list out to Chicago, and they got to race and compete and throw, etc., without a mask. And we had some really good marks out there, like Crystal Robinson. That was that gave her the tiebreaker to get her to nationals, the 200. Greg Jindal, they got his time to get to nationals out there. We had a lot of good things happen. So I shouldn't even have whined about it as much as I did. Yeah, there's some frustrations, but again, there are a lot of schools that envy that we even get to compete in masks. So I should count my blessings, or we should count our blessings.
Now it's the fall of 2021, and you're about to have a somewhat normal preseason. You're getting ready to compete for the first time in 2 years as the cross-country programs. What was that experience like as you're finally having a preseason, but then you're also about to like toe the line at your first meet?
Is more getting back in the routine. Like, fortunately, it's kind of what you talked about before. With our sport, we don't have much of a gap. So you're kind of used to this routine with athletes developing, whatever else it was. So in the same way, we'd kind of just gone through a season. This is the first time we didn't have to run in masks, so there's a little bit of an adjustment there. There's still some things we had to be, cautious with COVID still. So there's some things in preseasons that we usually done, like we go up to Jim Thorpe and go whitewater rafting and stuff like that. There's some things that kind of got pushed aside because of that. But by and large, we were able to have some normalcy, and we just come off the spring where there was some normalcy. So is more just remembering the routine of some things that we forgot. You get in the routine of what you have to do before a meet with getting the transportation, getting the food, like all those like logistically things. Yeah. I think that if there was an adjustment, that was as much as anything. It was just you forgot the pattern and everything you had to do when you got into a meet.
So speaking of logistics, it was a big year for the program as you got to host the Landmark Conference Championship meet, which means not only do you host the championship meet, you host a preview meet.
Yeah.
What goes, because I've seen it secondhand now from this and also at Cedar Crest with Alec. What goes into setting up the course, because it was hosted at Bicentennial Park in Bethlehem. What goes into the process of hosting a cross-country meet?
Since we don't have something, obviously it's different if it's your own property. It's not our own property. We're using a public park. So the first thing is working with the Parks Department. I was literally there this morning actually paying a bill still from the meet. But you're trying to make sure that you're not interfering with their lacrosse tournaments and whatever else they got going on. So it's just trying to schedule a time that you can actually do it that then works with the rest of the coaches and all that kind of jazz. There's a lot of other stakeholders. We're getting all the meet officials, the timers. I've got to be able to set up the course. So there's a lot of painting that you have to do. There's, certificate of insurance you have to, get to the park, like all that kind of stuff. So honestly, there's a lot of prep that goes in even before the summer starts, but it's like trying to make sure you can iron out a date. Like part of the things I was doing even this summer is ironing out with the Parks Department when are days where I can go out and paint the course and getting porta potties there and blah blah blah. So it's sometimes I even forget the details. It's like you get into a groove, but it's honestly it's months of planning, like little minutia to making sure that you're not interfering with. Again, it's someone else's property too. You can't just It's not like your own basketball gym or football field where you can go and sit up whenever the heck you want to. You're working with, when they've got to work too. So it's a lot of preseason planning for sure.
And just seeing how much goes into hosting this event, let alone hosting a home soccer game. The field's there. You just kind of set up the equipment. This is like full-blown painting lines every time you're going to this event. Yeah. Fortunately, it's only twice in a season, at least this season. But just seeing, we went the day before to set up because we live streamed the meet, which was just so cool to finally have a streamed event for a sport like cross country. But seeing you and Coach Diatavio out there just setting up, and the wind was insane. But fortunately, not saying it wouldn't have been as gratifying if this didn't happen, but the men's cross-country team did walk away with the Landmark Conference title, the third one in your tenure. What was that moment like, realizing that it came down to a tiebreaker, but your men's squad was the conference champions? Yeah,
well, I mean, it goes a lot back to what I was saying with the 2016 team. And like thought we knew we had a really good class that came in, and things just never came together with them being able to win the conference or get some other things we wanted to do on the national level. So, like, part of what I even told the team afterwards, the gratification was that, like, in the picture we did afterwards, we had a bunch of alums, like Alex Tercey and Justin Beasley Turner, Carly was there, a number of other alums, Donnie Noble. Like, they knew what kind of been working on for a long, for the duration of a class of athletes. So part of it was, kind of that fulfillment. But the meet itself was kind of like hit and miss, at least with the men's side, where M&D timing did a good job with the mid-race checkpoints of the scoring and stuff like that. And I knew we were in a really good position at about 2.5, 3 miles in, where we had our top 5 pack was all in about the top 15. We're fine. And then Shane Houghton was holding his own up front, but then with about, I could see maybe about the 3.5 mile mark, Shane wasn't looking so hot. And then things went from, there's no way to sugarcoat it. It didn't go so well from him. Yeah, he went from 3rd place to about 42nd. And if you look at the scoring in the middle of the race with about half mile to go, I think we were still winning by 10 points. And that's with Shane in like 4th or 5th place. And then when he fell to 42nd place, all of a sudden it's a tie meet. So in some ways is like the score looked very close because it was. But had Shane had a better day, then we would have been able to win. We would have been able to win fine. So it's like all these different emotions where you're kind of happy in the past, and then like even at the line, we saw this with the women too. Is like when with live meet scoring, sometimes things aren't official. You're waiting for stuff to come in. That's literally what happened with our women. Is granted this happened after the men. But the men were tied at 50, and I knew we had the tiebreaker. But you're like, is something not scored yet, or something like that? So you're like, you're kind of happy, but you're like
the anxiousness of waiting.
Yeah, exactly. And then that's literally what happened with the women, where
it was so
we were winning by a point, and then what happened is one of another team's runners. Her team wasn't scored as a team until their 5th runner came in a couple minutes later.
Okay, yeah.
So
that's what
with the women's score
factor was.
Yeah, so with the women, we're up by a point, and all of a sudden that is a runner from Juniata, and when their 5th runner came in, then all of a sudden she went from not being factored in the team scoring to then displacing some of our runners lower. So that's why I was leery of with the men, and because it actually ended up happening with the women is how we lost by a point that way. The emotions were kind of all over the map, but certainly, in the end, it was just very gratifying to see that all the work that starting from that class, and I don't mean to say that that's, whatever when the program started by any means, but this resurgence of where our program can and should be, or what we want it to be, it started with that class, and it's good to see them there because they had so much to do with where this program has climbed.
And speaking on how the program has developed and climbed, Stabilito and Houghton's name come to mind as they did go to regionals and qualify for nationals. But the youth of both programs really stepping up their game throughout the season. Amber Ponectera comes to mind, Nate Hadgel, obviously, Owen Nafe, just a couple of names to throw out. What really do you think contributes to how they improved over the year? Because we talk about culture, but I'm not saying they didn't look good on paper. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I know those are some of the names we talked about in the season preview, and they just flourished throughout the season.
A couple of them I knew that was going to come, especially with the men, the jump from 5K to 8K in college it's dramatic. So you don't always see people. What I always tell recruits too is honestly the goal is to have you hit your stride by sophomore year of cross country, just because it's such an adjustment. Women usually kind of expect them to be able to come make an impact freshman year. Where I'm going with that is freshmen men, you don't want to have to count on them, and I don't mean that to sound mean. It's an adjustment. Women you can usually expect more of, but. Yeah, with a couple of them like Owen Nafe, I just knew when I was watching him recruiting and talking to him, you just see his stride, and I know they don't do a ton of mileage at Northampton, which is great. Again, that's what I talked about before. That means they got a lot more room to grow. I knew he was going to take off. I knew Nate Hadgel was a stud coming out of high school, some of the stuff he's running in Morris County. Jake Farrell was the one that kind of pleasantly surprised me, and I think he'd say the same. He actually took a gap year. He was going to go to NC State, and then with COVID hit, he didn't want to be doing virtual and all this kind of stuff, so we reevaluated it. And this is kind of a learning lesson recruiting with me too, where I had talked to his sister about, 7-8 years ago or something like that to try and recruit her, and she wound up going to Shippensburg. But I remember the whole family was there, including Jake, when he was 4th grade at the time or something like that, and he's on the tour. And the thing that I've always been like this anyway, but this reinforces that message is it always hurts when you lose a recruit and they say they're going somewhere else, But as a coach, always be, graceful and tactful and all kind of stuff. Never, like get mad and say you shouldn't go to the other school or anything like that, because you never know when that's going to bite you back in the butt. And it can be in 1,000 different ways, but one of them is, the Farrells are a great family. I'm not just saying that because Jake Farrell's on our team and I'm doing this podcast, but they are great people. And I was bummed when she decided to go to Shippensburg, but it's like, you made a decision that's best for you. That's great. I wish you the best of luck and all that kind of stuff. And I guess I've never specifically asked Jake, but I think that we're at least still in the mix because he happened to tour. I didn't blow off Abby when she said she was going elsewhere. So, but anyway, back to Jake. Yeah, he is someone that he really took advantage of kind of that gap year. Yeah. And if you look on paper, he's only like a 17.28, I think, 5K out of high school. Not someone you expect to be all conference his first year across country. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But he just really bought into things. He worked his butt off. His brother's coaching some. He was coaching down at Downington West to kind of keep engaged and stuff. And he's someone that just, I don't know, bought in and worked his butt off. And he is one of those ones that, as I was talking about earlier in this podcast, where sometimes you just have the culture of good people and then sometimes people really rise more than you expected. Mm-hmm. Jake is definitely one example of that. Then on the women's side, Rachel Byrne, honestly, is another one, too, where we expect her more in the 400, and I wasn't really going to do much in cross-country with her. We may do a lot more speed work with her and all this kind of stuff, but she's someone that just kind of buys in, loves the team, really good work ethic, and all that kind of stuff, and she was huge for us this year. Absolutely. When we had a lot of injuries and illnesses come up with our senior class, which really hurt us this year, unfortunately, but it's nice to have someone like Rachel Byrne was like a huge, huge ascension for us. I don't want to say out of the blue because she obviously has a lot of talent, the 800 and the 400, but with the cross-country things, that caught me by surprise, especially around Paul Short when she started to ascend. So
yeah, just a lot of positives coming from, I don't want to say unexpected because they're recruited for a reason. The way that they performed, it was when they needed to.
Yeah.
And it's never a gamer situation, but at the same point when seeing her name climb the results, it's like Rachel in particular, it's just like, wow.
Yeah.
You love to see that type of ascension. And because she's a sophomore, so seeing that come through. And I mentioned Amber, like we spoke about her in the preview, and just to see that, I don't want to say she followed through, but she met and exceeded the expectation.
And honestly, she's another one, I was kind of actually expecting a little more right out of the gates with her, and it just kind of took a little while to kind of click in. Like her and Pia really established themselves as like a training pack from early workouts and like whatever in August and stuff like that. And it just seems like they really started to click together, and Pia started to take off her own. Really all season, but Paul Short was a big breakout for her. It took Amber, I think, a little bit of time to gain the confidence that she belonged with her. And she eventually figured that out, especially by conference. Then on regionals, she had awesome. Amber had a huge breakout at regionals. But like I said, we were kind of talking about some of the youth that's ascending, and we're blessed that with the women, we've got some young people that they aren't even close to their top end yet, and that's obviously really exciting as a coach. Like that you've got a lot of things to look forward to, and you kind of don't know what's in store in a positive way. And we certainly have some of those athletes.
Well, and that leads into the final question I have. You finish this past season on a high note, just a point away from the women's squad earning the Landmark Conference title, but the men do claim that crown. With as much youth and potential as you have moving forward, what can we expect moving forward next year for this cross-country team?
Both squads. It's obviously tough to lose. We're going to be losing Natalie Stabolito. So maybe I'll speak with just the women first. Emma Marion and Santina Burek. That's going to hurt a lot, obviously, and especially with Santina. All of them are great leaders, and Natalie was at nationals, all that kind of good stuff. That being said, we have a really, really good freshman commit for next year and some good depth of other freshmen potentially coming in. But also our freshman class this year on the women is, with Lillian Mangor, really stepped up this year. Katie Lovett, Rachel Goodman, I think, is someone that's still discovering her stride, but I expect really big things from her. Like, we got a lot of really good young pieces with the women where we just finished 5th in the region, and I honestly think we can be even better next year, even with some of the hits that we're taking, and that's no disrespect to our senior class that was huge for us this year. But just again, we were kind of just talking about Amber and Pia and some of them, how Rachel Byrne, how they're just kind of starting to figure things out. So I'm expecting that they can be a top 5 team at regionals, and we were doing that, then it's in any given day, maybe you have a shot at nationals. With the men too, I mean, we had, I think it was we're going to pretty much bring everyone in our top 7 back. We're going to lose Dom DeRaffalo, but Shane Houghton's most likely coming back, picking up a second major. So we'll probably have 6 of our top 7 runners back from a team that's just 6th in the region. I honestly don't think we had a great regional race either. So if we bring in all those people back with someone that, a team that I think could be, I don't know. We're honestly talking about nationals being the potential for this group because, 3 of our main components are freshmen, and you see so much growth going from freshman to sophomore year as you adapt to the training and all the, the racing distance, all that kind of stuff. So, especially it's just like Nate Hadgel. If you just look at the growth he had in 3 months, it was just astounding.
Absolutely.
He was our, 7th or 8th, I don't know what he was, runner went at our first meet at Lehigh, and all of a sudden he is our top guy at conference and number 2 at regionals. And you could just see, like, objectively looking at the data of his workouts and stuff, how much he improved. And if that was just in a 3-month span, imagine what's going to look like in a 12-month span with him and Owen and Jake. Someone that is going to be a big name for us that you didn't see as much this year was Josh Mangini. He had a lot of different injury issues. And the guy ran a 15:55K for us during COVID. Then he's just been battling through some stuff. But we get him healthy. He's just as talented as any of those freshmen. And obviously with Shane back and Liam Duffy, same thing. He had maybe something I didn't talk about is our men were beat up all year. Like, we didn't even know if we'd have a lot of these guys that were key for us
in the conference,
conference meet and going on. Liam Duffy is one of them. He was out. He basically didn't run for a month.
Yeah, I was going to say it was almost a month because of just injuries. So.
Injuries and all that kind of stuff. So, like, if we have a healthy season with these, like, even what we accomplished this year is just kind of not just because of the fact they're a freshman, but it's a shadow of what they can accomplish just because they were so beat up. Owen Nafe, he's another one. He only ran about, 3 or 4 days from Paul Short until conference, and here he is, whatever it was, 8th in the conference. Again, Liam Duffy was, I think, 12th or whatever he was, all conference. The guy hardly ran for a month, so I'm rambling off a bunch of stuff, but yeah, the excitement is, I keep telling John, like, next year could be one of the best years we've ever had in the history of our program. I don't mean to be hyperbolic or put too much pressure on him, but just looking at things objectively.
Absolutely. It's that excitement level, the potential. Like, if you're healthy, what this team could do for the program is going to be astounding.
Yeah. And well, the other thing that's about it is, I keep saying the culture thing is, like, especially the freshmen, and not to say that it's not coming from the upperclassmen, because undoubtedly it is, but, like, they're really bought in too, and that's what's important is, like, they are eager to get out and run. Like Owen Nafe, if he ever has a bad workout, like, honestly, the day after, that night, he'll come in and ask me, like, what can I do to get better, coach? Like, across the board, the people, Casey Frank, he's texting me all the time on the side about ways that he can get better and, moving up into better event groups. He's not someone we talked about, but he's got a lot of injury issues and has tons and tons and tons of talent. So just, like, again, the eagerness of these guys to get better and so much youth and so much injury history, if we can get by that, like, again, this season is honestly just barely scratching the surface of what these guys could do. And again, not just because they're freshmen, because we were so freaking beat up and lucky to get to the line.
The intrinsic motivation, that definitely plays a role, because if they have that culture where everyone wants them to get better, they want to get better too. So having that buy-in within themselves to help the bigger picture.
Yeah, like, again, Owen is another example. I don't mean to keep dwelling on him, because other people you could apply this to too. Jeffrey Kleinberg, you can name it. But, like, I used the pool more this year. I've always been a big advocate of what you can do in the pool. As to me, it's the best form of cross training you can do. It's the closest you can simulate running if you can't run because of injuries or whatever the case is. But he is someone, I mainly use it this year for some of our injury-prone athletes or that were actually injured at the time. Owen kept asking to go in extra time. Like, he'd do his runs, like, hey, can I join the injured group tonight, get an extra volume, because he's trying to make that, bridge that gap. And so many other guys are just like that. Again, like, Casey Frank is one that jumps to mind, that is always looking for how he can, do more. Even Wyatt Panictro, and, like, he's someone that just came in here to just do the 800, and he is always asking to do extra 8Ks and stuff like that. Like, so across the roster, it's guys that want to work hard and all that kind of stuff. So, like, I'm never one to pat myself on the back, and I'm certainly not going to with this year's team, because it's just like they're good guys that want to work their butt off. And the women, I'm sorry, I'm talking about the men too much, because the women is the same thing too. Like, the way Lily Mangora and Rachel Goodman and Amber Panictor and some of our freshmen took off this year, and it's the same stuff with them. It's how hungry they are, and what a good Riley Murphy, I should be mentioning her more too, where she's like such a team first, hungry, athlete that wants to improve. And we're just blessed to have that across both rosters. And that's fun, because it hasn't always been that way. I'll be honest. We've had some years where the culture wasn't the best.
Yeah.
Every team goes through that. So when you finally get that, it's almost like the ship steers itself in some ways. It's kind of nice when you can, obviously you're not literally standing back and not doing anything, but there's a lot more burden taken off of your shoulders when the athletes can kind of take a lot of autonomy in their development.
Jesse, thank you so much for spending time with me this afternoon to talk about and kind of recap how the programs did this past fall, but also reflect back on what it was like for you as a student athlete throughout your coaching tenure. Just been a pleasure to learn about your experience and how you've developed the program here. So thank you.
Well, thank you for this opportunity, and thanks for all that you guys do. Obviously, the first ever live stream landmark cross country meet is thanks to the efforts of you and Mark. So thanks to all that you guys are doing for sports information here as well.
Thanks, Jesse. I appreciate it. I had such a great time talking with Jesse Baumann, the director of cross country and track and field here at Moravian. We had the opportunity to reflect on his past and his success as a student athlete, then taking that success through his coaching tenure, including his most recent men's cross country championship as the host of the Landmark Conference Championship meet. Be sure to follow the cross country and track and field programs on social media at Moravian XCTF on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And if you haven't done so already, go ahead and follow Moravian University Athletics as well. That's all I have for you on this episode of the Hounds Huddle podcast. Until next time, I am LJ Smith, signing off.